My name is Vreth-Solan, third cycle diplomat student of the Karun Collective, assigned observer to the Galactic Integration Academy on the neutral station Orveth 9. My job, officially, was to study human behavioral patterns in educational environments. My job, unofficially, was to survive the experience without losing my mind. I had been told humans were dangerous. Every student from every species in this academy had been told the same thing before humans were admitted into the program. The Galactic Council sent us all a very polite document titled Coexistence Guidelines Regarding Terran Students, which was essentially 47 pages of the Council nervously clearing their throats and saying, "Please, for the love of all your various gods, do not provoke them." I read the document 3 times. I highlighted the important parts. I took notes. None of it prepared me for Mira Voss. She arrived on the first day of the 3rd academic cycle, looking absolutely unremarkable. That was the first trick. Humans, I had learned by then, had a talent for appearing ordinary right up until the moment they were not. Mira Voss was short by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she could not be bothered with it, and eyes the color of something that had not yet decided what color it wanted to be. Brown, gray, something in between, watching, always watching. She came from a place called Svalbard. I had looked it up. I immediately regretted looking it up. Svalbard was an island in the Arctic region of Earth, a planet that the Galactic Council had classified as a Class 7 Deathworld, which was the highest classification that existed before they invented a new category, specifically for Earth, and called it Please Reconsider. Svalbard had polar bears. It had temperatures that would kill most species within minutes of exposure. It had months of total darkness. It had months of constant daylight, which apparently was just as damaging to living things, but in a different, somehow more insulting way. Mira Voss had grown up there. She had gone to school there. She had learned to navigate blizzards and ice fields before she learned, by her own cheerful admission, how to operate a hovercycle. She walked into the Integration Academy with a small bag over one shoulder and the quiet, settled confidence of a creature that had never genuinely feared anything it had encountered, because everything it had encountered had been trying to kill it first and failed. I sat 3 rows behind her in interspecies communication theory, and I spent most of the first lecture watching her instead of the instructor. She took notes with a physical pen on physical paper. Physical paper. She had brought paper to a space station. I did not know whether to be charmed or alarmed, so I settled on both simultaneously, which is a very efficient emotional strategy. The first real incident happened on the 14th day. The Academy had 4 primary student groups from 4 species. Humans, obviously, then the Karun, which was my people, tall and 4-armed and deeply invested in the concept of social hierarchy, then the Vreth, who were small and fast and communicated primarily through subsonic vibrations that no other species could hear, which made them either very private or very rude, depending on your interpretation. And then there were the Breth. The Breth were from a world called Orveth, which was cold and rocky, and produced beings of considerable physical size, and a social culture built entirely around the concept of dominance through intimidation. They had 3 representatives at the Academy. Their names were Corad, Sutan, and the one the other students called Bulk because his actual name had 17 syllables and caused minor hearing damage if pronounced incorrectly. Corad was the one who decided Mira Voss would be an interesting target. I will be honest with you. I was curious too. Not in that way. In the scientific way. Purely. The Breth had a tradition of testing newcomers, of establishing where in the hierarchy a new being belonged by pressing on them until they showed their limit. It was not kind, but it was their culture, and the Academy tolerated it with the same exhausted patience with which it tolerated most things. Most species responded to Corad's testing the way you would expect. They got smaller, they got quieter, they moved their belongings to different tables in the dining hall. The Vreth student named Pekira had actually requested a room transfer after Corad stood in her doorway for 11 minutes without saying anything. That was apparently sufficient. Corad was approximately 2.5 meters tall. He had a secondary skeletal structure under his skin that served no biological purpose anyone could identify except to make him look like something that had survived a building falling on it and considered the building the loser. His voice operated at a frequency that activated mild panic responses in 4 out of 6 known sapient species. He walked up behind Mira Voss in the corridor outside the lecture hall on the 14th day and said, in very deliberate galactic standard, "The small Earth creature sits at my table at midmeal." It was not a question. It was not an invitation. Among the Breth, This kind of statement was the equivalent of marking territory. Every other student in that corridor went very still, in the way that prey goes still when a predator moves nearby, that ancient animal logic that says if I do not move, perhaps it will not notice me. Mira Voss turned around. She looked up at Corad the way you might look up at a building you were about to enter, with mild professional assessment and absolutely zero personal concern. "No thanks," she said. The corridor stayed perfectly silent. Corad stared down at her. He made a sound, low and resonant, that the Karun translation matrix rendered as something between "how amusing" and "you have made a significant error." He took one step closer to her, which brought him near enough that his shadow covered her entirely. Mira tilted her head slightly. She looked at him the way you might look at a weather forecast you found unconvincing. "I grew up with polar bears," she said, conversationally, pleasantly, in the tone of someone sharing a fun fact at a dinner party. "They are bigger than you, they are meaner than you, they smell better than you, which, I say this kindly, is a meaningful thing to note." She paused. "I have a table. It has my bag on it. I like it there. You are welcome to introduce yourself if you want to be a normal person about it." Then she turned back around and walked to class. I watched Corad's face do something I had not seen it do in 14 days of observation. It did nothing. It was completely still. He stood in the corridor for a moment longer than was comfortable for anyone nearby, and then he walked away. Sutton, who had been standing nearby, leaned toward Bulk and made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as, "Did that just happen?" Bulk made a sound the translation matrix rendered as apparently. I wrote 7 pages of notes that evening. My academic advisor, a Karun elder named Vreth-Solan, who was also distantly related to me and never let me forget it, read my preliminary report and sent back a response that said, simply, "Do not get too close to her." I appreciated the advice. I immediately did the opposite. Her name was Mira Voss. She was from Svalbard. She was studying xeno-diplomatic relations with a minor in what the academy curriculum listed as applied conflict de-escalation, which was either ironic or the most perfectly chosen academic path in the history of higher education, and I genuinely could not decide which. I introduced myself 11 days after the corridor incident. I did it in the most methodical, least threatening way I could manage, which for a Karun meant standing at a respectful distance, keeping all 4 arms visible and relaxed, and beginning with a formal Karun greeting phrase that translated to something like, "I mean you no difficulty, and my intentions are observable." She looked at me. She said, "Hi, Vreth-Ro, right? You sit behind me in communication theory. You take notes by hand too." I did not take notes by hand. I was recording on a subdermal device. But I had apparently been mimicking her paper and pen routine unconsciously, and I had not noticed, and the fact that she had noticed before I did was the beginning of what I can only call a deeply educational friendship. "You are not afraid of the Breth student," I said. It was not the most elegant opening line in interspecies diplomatic history. She considered this. "Corad. He is just big. Big is not the same as dangerous. I have met plenty of big things. Most of them were more scared of me than I was of them. That is," I said carefully, "not the typical response to Corad." "I know," she said, without any particular emotion attached to it. "Not pride, not amusement, just acknowledgement, the way you might acknowledge that the sky was a certain color. I noticed. We sat together for midmeal that day. She ate something she had prepared herself in the student kitchen, which she described as pickled herring on dark bread with butter, and which smelled like a small crime against olfactory sensory systems. She offered me some. I declined. She seemed to respect the decision. "You are studying us," she said, after a while. It was not accusatory, it was just accurate. "Yes," I said, "because lying to someone who had already identified what you were doing seemed counterproductive. It is my assignment, human behavioral patterns in integrated academic environments." She nodded. "And, what have you figured out so far?" I thought about this carefully. That most species in this academy are afraid of humans, and that most humans do not appear to notice or do not appear to care. She smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that meant the thought was bigger than the expression being used to contain it. "Oh, we notice," she said. "I wrote that down." She let me. She watched me do it, and did not say anything, and that was somehow the most human thing she had done so far, letting a person record her, trusting that the recording would be fair. I had 3 days before the real incident. I did not know that yet. The Academy's social calendar included a weekly gathering in a shared common area on the station's 4th level, called Integration Social Night, which was exactly what it sounded like, and about as genuinely comfortable as the name suggested. Different species sat in different clusters, and occasionally exchanged polite, carefully translated phrases about cultural practices, and everyone pretended this was going smoothly. Mira attended. She sat with a human student named Tobias Ferrer, who was from a coastal city and who had the easy, loud warmth of someone who had never lived anywhere that regularly tried to end him. They were an interesting pair. He talked a lot. She listened a lot. Between them they seemed to constitute one complete social personality. I watched from across the room. I had Pek-Ira the Veleth beside me, sending subsonic commentary that I could not hear but that my translator device captured as a running stream of observations about everyone in the room. Pek-Ira's observations were extremely judgmental. I respected that about them. Corad was there. He had not approached Mira again since the corridor, but he watched her the way something watches something it is still deciding about. Sutton and Bulk were with him. They drank a beverage that smelled like engine coolant. I had been told it tasted excellent if you were Breth. I had no plans to verify this. The integration night ended at standard station hour 22. Students filtered out through the main corridor in clusters, heading toward their residential sections. Mira said something to Tobias that made him laugh loudly, waved, and turned toward the wing where her quarters were, which was separate from the main cluster, which was, as it turned out, very convenient for certain plans. I was leaving with Pek-Ira when I noticed Corad watching the direction Mira had gone. Sutton leaned to say something to him. He nodded once. Something settled in my chest, something cold and alert. I told Pek-Ira I had forgotten something. I went back. I followed the corridor Mira had taken, the one that led to the residential east wing, the one that at this hour was quiet and narrow, and had a camera maintenance gap that every student who had been here longer than a month knew about from the informal information exchange. The Academy laughingly called a student notice board. The gap was between junction points C7 and C9. Everyone knew about it. The Academy knew everyone knew about it. Fixing it was apparently on a maintenance schedule that existed somewhere in a file that no one had opened in approximately 2 academic cycles. I heard them before I turned the corner. Corad's voice first. That resonant, deliberate galactic standard. This section has no cameras. Earth student. Then Sutton, from the side, cutting off one direction. Then Bulk, behind. I stopped at the corner. I could not see Mira yet. I could see the 3 Breth, positioned the way the Breth position themselves when they are doing the thing their culture calls correcting misalignment, which was a very polite phrase for something considerably less polite. And then I heard her voice. Mira Voss's voice, in the camera-dead corridor, surrounded by 3 beings who were each larger than her by a significant margin, each from a culture built around the principle that size determined worth. She did not sound afraid. She sounded, if anything, mildly interested. "Ha," she said. "You planned this." I stood at the corner. I did not move. I should have done something. Called for a station security unit, used my communication device, shouted. I did not do any of those things. Because something in the air of that corridor had changed, and every animal instinct in my 4-armed Karun body was sending me the same message, and the message was, do not interrupt this. Something is about to happen, and whatever it is, the most dangerous thing in this corridor is not the 3 very large beings who planned it. It is the small one from the island where everything wanted to kill her, and she had been waiting for this. The question was, what exactly was she going to do? I held my breath. I want to be precise about the silence that followed Mira's words, because it was not a normal silence. Normal silence is just the absence of sound. This was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes the space between heartbeats feel very long and very loud. Every species in the known galactic collective has a word for this specific silence. The Karun call it Vreth-Solan, which translates roughly to the pause before the world changes. I had never experienced it before that moment. I had only read about it in cultural text. I was experiencing it now, wedged at the corner of junction C7, 4 arms pressed flat to the corridor wall, breathing as quietly as I had ever breathed in my life. Corad took a step forward. I could hear the particular weight of his footfall on the station floor, that heavy, deliberate placement that the Breth use when they want you to feel each step as a statement. The small earth creature made a scene, he said, in public, in front of others. This requires correction. His galactic standard was precise and formal, which somehow made it worse. He was not speaking carelessly. He had thought about this. Mira Voss stood where she was. I could see her back from my position, that small frame, that dark hair pulled back. She had not moved when he stepped forward. She had not leaned away. She had not done the thing that every other species in this academy would have done, which was to attempt to make themselves appear less threatening, by appearing less present, which is the universal body language of prey. She just stood there. "Okay," she said. "Just that, okay." Corad stopped moving. I think he expected something different. Fear, ideally, some acknowledgement of the situation. A request for negotiation, perhaps. The Breth respected a good negotiation almost as much as they respected a good capitulation. Either response would have fit neatly into the social script he had rehearsed. "Okay is not a response," Sutan said from the left. Sutan was the talker of the three. Corad was the weight. Bulk was the backup, and Sutan was the one who managed the verbal portion of the intimidation process with what I can only describe as genuine professional dedication. "Sure it is," Mira said. "It means I heard you and I am thinking about what you said." "And what are you thinking?" Sutan asked. "I am thinking," Mira said, and there was something in her voice now, a quality I had not heard before, not quite warmth and not quite cold, something that lived between the two and was comfortable in that difficult space, that you three spent real time on this. The maintenance gap, the timing after the social night, the positioning, that took coordination. "Pause." "I respect that," she said. Corad made a sound. The translator rendered it as something between confusion and irritation. "You respect the setup of your own correction?" "I respect effort," Mira said, simply. "I grew up in a place where things that did not put in effort died. So yes, you planned. I noticed that." There was a moment, one of those moments where a conversation could go in several directions, and everyone in it is aware of that, and the direction it chooses will be determined by whoever speaks next and what they say. Sutan said, "It will not help you." And Mira Voss said, "I know, I was not saying it to help me, I was saying it because it is true, and because I am going to tell you something true in exchange, as a courtesy, before this goes further." The silence again, Vreth-Solan, the pause before the world changes. "You are bigger than me," she said. "All three of you, by a lot, I know that. I am not confused about that. Where I come from, everything is bigger than a person. The bears are bigger, the cold is bigger, the dark is bigger, the ocean under the ice is bigger, and it is extremely interested in killing you in a way that is nothing personal, just physics." She paused. "I learned something early," she continued, and her voice had dropped slightly, not quieter exactly, but lower, the way a fire gets lower and hotter at the same time. "The thing that will kill you is not always the biggest thing in the room. The thing that will kill you is the thing that does not need you to be afraid of it to do what it came to do." Bulk made a sound, low and uncertain. The translator could not render it into words, which was unusual. Most Breth vocalizations had direct translation matches. This one apparently did not, which meant it was coming from somewhere older than language. Corad said, "You are threatening us." "No," Mira said, and she sounded almost genuinely surprised. "I am giving you a chance to leave, which is different. A threat is about what I want. This is about what I know. I know what happens next if you stay. I am letting you know that I know. What you do with that information is your business." Sutan laughed. It was a forced laugh, the kind of laugh that is performing confidence rather than feeling it. "Three of us," he said. "One of you. No cameras." "Yes," Mira agreed pleasantly. "Exactly." Something shifted in the corridor. I felt it from the corner. Some atmospheric change I could not name with Karawan precision, but which my body understood before my brain caught up. The hairs on my secondary limbs rose. My translator device made a small sound. It made only when ambient tension levels exceeded its calibration range. Mira turned slightly. Not away from them, not toward an exit. She turned in the way that something turns when it is making sure of its angles, when it is mapping the space it is standing in with the kind of automatic spatial awareness that you develop when you have spent years navigating environments that will not forgive a misplaced foot. She reached up, slowly, and took the band out of her hair. She shook it loose. She folded the band carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. That was all she did. And I am telling you, from my position at the corner, with 4 years of Karun diplomatic training and a solid academic background in interspecies behavioral analysis, I cannot explain to you why that specific action, that small and wordless action, hit the atmosphere of that corridor like a stone dropped into very still water. But it did. Bulk took a step back. It was a small step, half a step. His foot moved backward approximately 30 centimeters, and then he stopped himself, but the stop was too late. The movement had already happened, and Sutan had seen it, and Corad had seen it, and Mira had absolutely seen it. She did not look at Bulk. She kept her eyes on Corad, which I would later learn was the right tactical choice, because among the Breth, the hierarchy functions through the leader, and if the leader breaks, the unit breaks. Corad, she said, and she used his name for the first time, which in Breth social dynamics carries specific weight. Using a name is an act of recognition, and recognition can be an act of power if the person doing it is not afraid. I have been very polite. I want you to know that I am aware of that, and that politeness is a decision, not a limitation. Corad stared at her. He was doing the breath calculation. I could see it even from a distance, that rapid internal assessment of odds and outcomes, the thing every intelligent species does when a situation is not proceeding as expected. The Breth call it Orach Val, the moment of choosing the right ground. He chose. This conversation is finished, he said. He turned, he walked away, in the direction he had come from, and the particular quality of that walk was extremely interesting to me, because it was not the walk of someone who has decided to be merciful. It was not the walk of someone who has decided the target is not worth the effort. It was the walk of someone who has decided that they have found the exact edge of something they do not want to go past, and they are now walking away from that edge with great care and no small amount of speed. Sutan followed, Bulk followed, and Bulk was moving faster than dignity usually recommended. The corridor was empty except for Mira Voss, who stood with her hair down and her hands loose at her sides, and me, around the corner at junction C7, pressing myself against the wall and attempting to breathe normally. She turned. She looked directly at where I was standing. "Vreth," she said, "you can come out." I came out. There was nothing else to do. I was deeply grateful that Karun do not blush, because the experience I was having would definitely have caused blushing if I had the physical capability. She looked at me. She did not look angry. She did not look frightened. She looked the way she usually looked, observant and settled, and mildly amused by something she had not explained yet. "How long were you there?" she asked. "From the beginning," I said. "I apologize. I saw Corad watching the direction you left, and I was concerned, and I followed to determine if assistance was needed." "And did you determine that?" I thought about the question seriously, because she deserved a serious answer. "I determined," I said slowly, "that assistance was not needed, and I determined that intervening would have been, at minimum, a significant misreading of the situation." She smiled, the real smile, not the small contained one, the full one. "That is very diplomatic of you." "I am a diplomat student," I said. She laughed. It was short and real, the laugh of someone who finds something genuinely funny rather than performing amusement. "Come on," she said. "Walk with me. I want to tell you something, and I want to say it before I decide it is too much to share." We walked. The corridor opened back into the main station artery, wider and lit with the warm standardized lighting of Orveth 9's residential level, other students visible in the distance, everything ordinary and calm. "I was scared," she said. I looked at her. She was looking ahead at the corridor. "Not the way you mean, I think," she continued. "Not scared of them specifically, but scared in the way I always am when something like that happens, the way I get when things are genuinely uncertain." My hands were shaking. I could not let them see that. I processed this. "The whole time?" I asked. "The whole time," she confirmed. "You did not show it," I said. "No," she agreed. "Where I grew up you do not show it, not because showing it is weak, but because the thing in front of you should not get to use your fear as fuel." She paused. "Polar bears can smell fear. I am not certain that is literally true, but we operated as though it were, and honestly the practical outcome is the same." I thought about Corad walking away. I thought about Bulk taking that half step backward. I thought about Mira pulling the band from her hair. "What would you have done?" I asked, "if they had not left?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, something they would have remembered for a long time. She said it simply, the way she said everything, without drama and without the need for the statement to be bigger than it was. It landed exactly the size it was. I believed her entirely. We walked a while longer without talking, which was comfortable in the way that silences are comfortable between people who have been through something together, even if their respective roles in the thing were very different. "You will write about this," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "It is my assignment." "Will you write it accurately?" "I will write what I observed," I said, "which includes that I do not fully understand what I observed." She nodded, apparently satisfied. "That is honest. I appreciate that." At the junction where our residential corridors split, she stopped. She looked at me with those eyes that could not fully decide their color. "Vreth," she said, You are a good observer. You came because you were worried. You stayed because you understood what was happening better than you thought you did. Both of those things matter. I stood with that for a moment. Thank you, I said. Thank me by writing it down accurately, she said. And she walked away down her corridor, unhurried, hands easy at her sides, hair still loose. I went back to my room and I wrote for 4 hours without stopping. The next morning, in interspecies communication theory, Corad arrived and took a seat 3 rows further from Mira than he had previously occupied. He did not look at her. Sutan was quiet. Bulk spent the entire lecture studying his notes with the focused attention of someone who had decided education was suddenly their primary interest. The instructor, a Velith elder named Vreth-Solan, who communicated by subsonic vibration and hand gesture and never missed anything, observed all of this and made no comment. But at the end of the lecture, as students filed out, Vreth-Solan paused beside Mira's desk and made a specific gesture. The gesture, my translator told me, meant balanced. Mira looked up at the instructor, nodded once, and gathered her paper notes. I filed that observation too. My academic advisor Vreth-Solan read my final report on the incident 3 weeks later. He sent back a response that was longer than usual. It said, in the formal Karun academic style, your report describes an encounter between a Terran student and 3 Breth students in an unsurveilled corridor. Your conclusion that the Terran student managed the situation through a combination of behavioral unpredictability, precise emotional control, and strategic use of environmental uncertainty is well supported. Your secondary conclusion, that the Terran's apparent absence of visible fear functioned as an active destabilizing force rather than a passive quality, is more interesting and should be expanded in your dissertation. I note that you described the subject as a friend. This is unusual in an observer report. I suggest you consider whether it is accurate. I considered it. It was accurate. Mira Voss from Svalbard, who took paper notes in a space academy, who said okay to 3 beings twice her size and meant something different by it than anyone expected, who was scared the whole time and did not let it matter, who told me what she told me because she wanted someone to have the true version of the story. She was my friend. And I decided, going to be a considerably better diplomat for having known her. The Galactic Council's document had 47 pages about humans and how to handle them. Not one page, not one paragraph, not one single careful diplomatic sentence covered what to do when the human was the one being handled, and came out of it the way Mira came out of that corridor, hair down and unhurried, hands easy, like she had simply gone for a walk and found the experience mildly interesting. I wrote a supplementary note to my report. It said, update the document. 47 pages is not enough. Start with Svalbard. Start with what things are like when everything around you has been trying to end you since before you could talk, and you learned bone deep and early that the only way forward was to keep walking like you knew exactly where you were going even when you absolutely did not. Start there, I wrote. Everything else about humans follows from that. I sent the report. Then I went to find Mira at Midmeal, because she had promised to explain what pickled herring actually tasted like, and I had decided that a diplomat who could not face unfamiliar food had no business facing unfamiliar species. She was already at her table, paper and pen beside her tray. She looked up when I sat down. You are going to try it, she said. Not a question. I am going to try it, I confirmed. She pushed the plate toward me. I looked at it. It smelled the same as it always had, which was not encouraging. But Mira Voss was watching with that small contained smile, and outside the window of the dining hall the stars of Orveth 9's orbit turned slowly past, the great dark full of things we had not named yet. And I thought about a girl from an island where everything wanted to kill her, and how she faced each one of those things the same way she had faced the herring. Directly, calmly, without giving her fear the dignity of being visible. I picked up the fork. How bad is it? I said. Terrible, she said warmly. You will love it. I took a bite. She was wrong about the second part. But she was absolutely right about the first, and somehow that made the whole thing worthwhile.